Hey, my name is Vic and I'm thrilled to be here today with you as a newly licensed artist with Sizzix. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how you can make the most out of your colors using simple color mixing techniques. Today we'll use the primary Amsterdam acrylic set to mix colors and create a full spectrum. This limited palette will help us understand color mixing more effectively. I'll also be using the geometric layered stencil and stamp set that I designed for Sizzix, focusing on the second layer of the stencil. The hinge adapter on the registration tool here will lift the stencil slightly, which is perfect for our project today. At the heart of the color wheel are the primary colors, red, blue, and yellow. These colors are special because they cannot be created by mixing other colors together. They are the foundation for creating all colors. Notice how they are evenly spaced apart from each other on the wheel. In today's project, we'll create a whimsical color wheel using the stencil set. I'll be doing one flower of each color, red, blue, and yellow, with the blender tool. The Amsterdam acrylic set includes primary magenta, primary yellow, and primary cyan. This particular version of the primary colors is wonderful for color mixing because it's going to give us very vibrant mixes. Remember, you can always use different versions of primary colors, but they will alter how your color wheel will look. Let's discuss secondary colors, created by mixing two primary colors together. For example, mixing red and yellow gives us orange, while mixing red and blue will make purple, and last but not least, mixing blue and yellow will create green. I find it helpful to lay out the primary colors on your palette with some space in between them. This way, you can learn to mix them easily with a palette knife or your blender tool. And all you're going to have to do is fold the paint together until you're happy with the color that you've created. The great thing about color mixing with a very limited palette, such as 3 colors, is that it's easier to identify what you need to add to your paint to correct the hue. For instance, if your orange is too red, add more yellow. If it's too yellow, just add more red. Next, we're going to mix together yellow and blue to create green. You'll find that the yellow is not going to have as much mixing power as the blue or the red. Yellow is not only a very light color, but it can be very transparent as well, so it takes a higher ratio of yellow to other colors to mix evenly. Lastly, we're going to combine red and blue together to create purple. Remember that they are adjacent on the color wheel, making this the final secondary color. I wanted to point out that I'm using the palette knife here to blend my colors together on the mixed media mat. The reason I'm doing this is so that I can keep the colors on my blending sponges very clean and separate. If you're mixing large batches of paint, the palette knife works wonderfully. Mixing colors and using them deliberately is a very important skill, but I think it's also equally important to be able to blend colors together. If blending colors in the color wheel or rainbow order, you will effortlessly create a beautiful spectrum of colors that blend seamlessly together. So in order to do this, I'm using a mop brush, but you can use any sort of brush that holds a lot of water. Our goal here is to thin down the acrylic so that it's much more fluid, and it will take on a watercolor type effect. Thinning the paint with water allows for a less noticeable brush stroke. It also allows for easier movement and more transparency. You'll see that the colors run into each other better when you use extra water. Acrylic paint is a very versatile medium. You can see how we can be very direct, or we can have it a little bit looser by just adding more water. Acrylic paint also dries waterproof, which means that it's great for building up layers. So all you need to do is make sure your layer below is dry, and then you can build on top of that. I'm using microns here to label my primary and secondary colors. The last type of colors are called tertiary colors. These are the colors between a primary and a secondary color. It fills in the gaps on our color wheel, and it will result in colors like yellow-orange or yellow-green. It's going to give us the full rainbow of colors. Coming back over to our sketchbook here, I'm going to be placing the tertiary colors in between the primary and secondary colors using a smaller design on the stencil. So, for example, the yellow and green, we can mix both of these two colors together to make the tertiary color, which would be yellow-green. The first one we're going to do together is going to be mixing the magenta and violet, and that's going to give us a warm purple. Tertiary colors are important because they're going to add harmony into your painting. And the most important thing to remember on how to mix them is that you need to combine a primary color, which in this case is the magenta, with a secondary color, in this case, violet. For yellow-orange, you would mix the primary color yellow with the secondary color orange, and that's going to give you the tertiary color yellow-orange. Using tertiary colors can enhance color harmony in your work by bridging the gap between primary and secondary colors. This can lead to more balanced and cohesive color palettes. Tertiary colors can also help in achieving realistic color variations, such as in skin tones or natural landscapes. When mixing tertiary colors, start with equal parts of the primary and secondary colors. Adjust the ratio to achieve the desired hue. So to recap, you start with primaries, mix those to create secondaries, and then mix one of each to create tertiaries. Now let's go over some other basic terms to help you better understand color theory. A hue is the name of a color, like red, green, or brown. Value refers to the degree of lightness or darkness of a hue. Now let's talk about tones, tints, and shades. These are variations of a color that we create by adjusting brightness and darkness by using both black and white. A tint is created by adding white to a color. So here we're adding white and yellow together, and you'll see that it's going to make it a pastel yellow. Depending on what type of white you use, it can also increase opacity, which is important if you plan to layer your paint. Shades are created by adding black to a color. Be cautious as you just need the tiniest amount of black. A small amount of black will darken the color significantly. As you can see, this shade of yellow is a much darker value than the tint. The darker a color is, the easier it will be to layer over other colors. Tones are made by adding gray to a color, resulting in a more muted version. To make gray, you must mix white and black, and then add your color. This creates a tone that is between a tint and a shade in terms of value. Just by adding black and white with yellow, we've been able to get a pastel and a dark, moody look too. By experimenting with tints, shades, and tones, you can achieve a wide range of effects and add a lot of depth into your artwork. I'm just going to go ahead and zip through here on mixing the rest of the tints, tones, and shades. Not all of these fit perfectly on the page, but I'm going to go through each color just so that we can have a full look of the spectrum together. Ta-da! Look at all these beautiful colors! So now let's discuss color temperature. Everything down in the bottom left-hand corner is considered a warm color, yellow, orange, and magenta. Everything in the upper right corner, green, blue, and violet, is going to be considered cool. Typically, cool colors recede into the background, and warm colors advance in the composition. Here's an example of color temperature in art. I created this mixed media illustration using the geometric collection. Notice how her skin is warm and prominently in that orange range, while the background is cool with a wash of blues. Not only do we have those warm colors popping forward, but I want to point out another thing. These colors are right across from each other on the color wheel, which means that they're complementary colors. All complementary colors are right across from each other on the wheel and contain one warm and one cool color, so they create extremely harmonious color schemes. To recap, we've covered the basics of the color wheel, including primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. We've also learned how to create tints, shades, and tones. We talked about warm and cool colors and how they can enhance your designs, and we've also touched on color harmony too. Now that we have all the concepts in place, I want to show you how you can use color mixing in your own projects. I'm going to be using the 3-layered stencil from the geometric collection, starting off with the first layer. And we're going to mix some yellow-green together. Remember that yellow-green is a tertiary color. We will start off by combining 2 primaries, which is yellow and blue, to make green. So let's start off with that first. I'm going to take a little bit of yellow and a little bit of blue to make my green. Then I'm going to use my palette knife to mix those thoroughly together. So now to take it from the secondary to the tertiary color, which is yellow-green, all I'm going to do is add more yellow into it. So I'm going to scoop some yellow over and just keep folding in that yellow until I'm happy with how much yellow is added. It may take a couple tries to get the combination right, but I'll use my palette knife to mix thoroughly, adjusting the color until it's predominantly yellow. You can always double check by comparing with your color wheel. I'm going to take my blender and dip it right into the paint. The Amsterdam acrylic has a medium body, and I want to apply the paint thinly. So what I'm going to do is remove some of the excess paint on the mat. A good thing to look for is a spongy print in terms of consistency of paint on the blender. The less paint that's on the blender, the softer transfer you'll get through the stencil. The more paint you use, the thicker it may be in some areas, and perhaps the stencil won't transfer as cleanly. I prefer to go in circular motions with the blending tool, but everybody kind of has their own way of doing it. When lifting the stencil, if there's any areas that look a little weak, you can actually just place the stencil down again, and everything will be perfectly aligned because of the registration system. I love this aspect because if you need to touch something up or decide to add more color, it's very simple to do. Now that the first layer is fully dry, let's apply the second. You can tell which layer of the stencil it is by the number right here at the top. I'm going to put my second layer directly on the registration tool, and I'm going to also keep my sketchbook in the same place. We're going to be using the blue, and I'm going to leave whatever green is left on my blender sponge. And what that's going to do is mix on my sponge, and it will create a blue-green tertiary color. If I wanted to use the primary blue, what I would do is get a clean sponge on my blender and possibly do 2 layers of that blue, depending on how strong I wanted the color to look. I think it's just really important to experiment and play around with the colors and see what you come up with. Knowing how to deliberately mix a color is, yes, very important as you grow your foundation of being an artist, but sometimes unexpected surprises are not only the best learning experience, but they also make for beautiful art. Just by using that leftover green on our sponge with a little bit of blue, we've created some gorgeous color harmony. For our third layer, you can see that for the most part, the stencil is basically going to be sitting on top of other colors. So I know that I'm going to want to mix a more opaque color for coverage. So let's make a tint using white and blue. We know that tinting will make it lighter, but we also know that it's going to make it more opaque. So by combining a semi-transparent and opaque color, we're going to get a more opaque color. This way, when it sits on top of our other layers, it'll stand out and look really crisp. Here, I'm using my palette knife to fold some blue and white together, and then I'll put on a fresh sponge to apply the top layer to the stencil. Again, with this registration tool, if you're not sure how bright it is, you can always lift the stencil up and make sure that it has good coverage. If your color is not covering the color below, try adding more white into it, because that will increase the opacity. Color mixing is so important because it's going to give your artwork so much more dimension and harmony. I hope you found this little segment helpful. If you do like these stencil patterns and you want to cover larger areas, I actually made these patterns so that they repeat. So you can just use the stencils a couple times on a single page and get a nice larger repeating pattern. And this 3-layer stencil set also comes with stamps as well. You can make all sorts of really fun geometric designs with it. I hope you feel inspired and confident to experiment with these techniques in your own projects. Don't be afraid to mix colors and play around with different designs. The more you practice, the more you'll discover what works best for you. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy painting and have fun with your colors.